Okay, good morning and welcome to the forum at All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Spencer Graves. I am a member of the Forum Committee. This forum is a platform for the discussion of significant issues, especially those involving the contemporary faith and ethical values in the contemporary world. It has been doing this since 1943. The descriptions of most of these forums since 2012 are searchable at kkfi.org, and podcasts are available for most of those. This program is live streamed on YouTube. If you log in, you can post questions in the chat, which will be asked of the speaker on your behalf, time permitting. People in the room are asked to silence your cell phones. Today, Mark Hull will tell us about the role of the media in conflict or war. Hull is a professor of military history at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He holds a PhD from a National University of Ireland, University College Cork, and is the author of two books, one on Irish secrets, German espionage in wartime Ireland that appeared in 2003, and Masquerade, Treason, Holocaust, and an Irish Imposter that appeared in 2017, in addition to many articles on history and aspects of international criminal law. He is an attorney. He has been an attorney for 33 years and was formerly a prosecutor. He now specializes in teaching other prosecutors about war crimes. He is also an elected fellow of the Royal Historical Society. He is currently working on a doctorate of law with Friedrich Alexander Universität in Erlangen, Nuremberg. His wife is German, and she helps him with subtle points in German text when the meaning may not be clear to him. So we ask our speaker to talk for roughly 30 minutes, after which we will request donations from the audience and then have questions. Professor Hull?
It's designed for taller people, I think. Good morning, and real excited about being here. Spencer said that I get a half an hour, at which point he unplugs the microphone, so we better get to work. Uh, there was one thing. Well, first of all, the that Heidi in translations, I should, to be accurate, it consists mostly of, I will say, does this mean X? And she'll look at me very disappointedly, like, No, it doesn't mean that." Um, the topic today, war and conflict. Uh, there is something I left off the bio that's going to be relevant today, which is I was in the Army for a long time, and my gig in the Army was in counterintelligence. That's going to be relevant a little bit later. There are a lot of different kinds of war. Some are overt. We're going to be talking about one of those briefly. The other kinds are sometimes secret, and we're going to be talking about one of those. And specifically in intelligence, when you're doing something that's called an active measure, which means you're not looking for information, that's not gathering. What you're looking to do is inflict harm. And I want to talk today about the role of the media can have in the promotion of harm. And then at the very end, with the last couple minutes, I'd like to talk about maybe something that we could do about that. The best analogy that I get, in other words, as far as the intelligence services go, you're not looking to use the media for the most part in an active measure campaign to change somebody's mind. That's usually going to be a bridge too far. What the goal is in active measures is what you might call maybe an information operation or an influence operation. And the idea here is not to change mind, but rather to activate things that already exist. Changing minds is very hard. Activating things is less hard. And the media is probably the most efficient way of doing that. So The way to look at this, another way, the analogy that I've sort of landed on when I talk about this, and I talk about extremism and I talk about some other stuff, or even connection to the Holocaust, is what I'm going to call the Amazon analogy. And it means that customers that bought A also bought B. And if I'm trying to get you to do something or to think a certain way or to act a certain way, and I can do some version of micro targeting, and I know enough about you, I can deliver a message that will never, and it's never the goal of getting all of you. All I need is a percentage, and I'm going to get that. So in the first case, I spent a couple years working on this last degree, doing something that I do not recommend to others, which is looking at thousands and thousands of pages of German court documents from the 1940s. Don't do it. Just don't do that. Um, and the question I want to ask was if you could charge somebody in international law or even domestic law with incitement only by using images. We think of incitement as words, spoken, written, maybe, but no. Especially living in sort of the century that we're in now, where image has replaced word, especially written word, as the primary deliverer of information. This idea of image as incitement it was kind of interesting. My problem that I found was that there has been no case in any court anywhere that has ever looked at that. And the only three cases I could find where that was involved were three post-war denazification cases in Germany. So from 1945 to 1949. Two of them involve film directors. One of them involved an artist or a caricaturist, kind of like a low-level pornographer, really, more than anything else. But this idea that using image was something that was appreciated by the people in Nazi Germany who directed propaganda as being probably the most effective way to get your message to people that were already primed to receive it. So the goal here was never to get most of the Germans to agree with you, and they didn't. What they were able to do is, since the people who staffed concentration camps, the people who staffed euthanasia centers, the people that provided logistics, the people that did 1,000 other things that made the Holocaust possible, are only sort of you're roughly 30% of the people, maybe 32, 33% of the people who are already primed by either circumstance or by family or by whatever to be receptive to the thing that you want them to do. That number 32 or 33% is important because we're going to come back to that again at the very end later because it should be a number that is familiar to you. Um, the images that are floating around the internet now on some of the darker and more disturbing places, and there are like thousands of these, and I'm not going to, excuse me, I'm not going to test your attention with any more of the nonsense, but they're vile and they're prolific. And they're easily findable. Don't. Hitler's chief of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, he is in a secular sense very evil in that his objectives in furthering Nazism, in furthering anti-Semitism, in furthering the war, if you like. He was very adept at using all the different levers he had available. So Nazi leaders made speeches. Hitler made them. Goebbels made them. Goering made them. Himmler made them sometimes. Julius Streicher made them sometimes. But he understood that that is not sufficient. His messages, Hitler's messages, and the Nazi message generally appeared in print. The Nazi party newspaper. There was a newspaper for the SS. There were periodicals that were designed for different groups in Nazi Germany. If you went to a public square, you would see a glass-fronted cabinet that would have the latest editions of something. But Goebbels also understood that that also was not sufficient. So that may get you the hearing person who absorbs information that way. It may give you the written person that absorbs information in a literate sense. But what they discovered is the more effective way was to use rather images that are memorable. And having talked to a gazillion people about this, or especially over the last couple of years, I can't find anybody that remembers a speech that Julius Streicher or Goebbels gave. They're just not memorable. They're vile again in their own little way, but they're not something that has stood the test of time. The images, on the other hand, are of a different nature. So, once upon a time, in the 1930s, it actually goes back to the 1920s. There is a periodical which reached a maximum circulation of 600,000, is called Der Stürmer. Stürmer in this case means agitator. Um, it is exclusively devoted to anti-Semitism in all of its forms. The guy second from left here, Julius Streicher, he's the publisher of Der Stürmer. So again, if you go to a German town, a major town, you would see uh, with Der Stürmer, the publication against Judaism. You couldn't help but trip over these things. And the images he used, drawn by a guy named Philip Ruprecht, who was the subject of one of these three post-war Nazi or denazification trials, are hitting these same tropes that have been around forever. So on the left-hand side, you see this German woman, smartly dressed, sort of 1930s, and the caption is the beginning. And then at the end, when she has been depraved and she's fallen because of the Jew that's hiding in the background. On the right-hand side, excuse me, is a series of captions. Jews are controlling money. The upper one, now go to the one on the far right there. Uh, says the caption on the bottom, "We poor Jews," and it's got a stereotypical Jew with an American hat. And the person tied to the stake on the left says unemployment, and the one on the right says misery. So the Jews are the maniacal people behind all the problems that you might have. The important point here is the caricatures and the cartoons as the vehicle for transmitting the message of hate that you want directed toward your target. And your target, again, is the percentage of your population who are already primed somewhere deep in their subconscious, perhaps, to share the same attitudes and values. You're not trying to promote them. It'd be great if you could, from their point of view, if you could promote them in everybody, but Goebbels knows that's not realistic. So we want to get the percentage that's already sort of, we're going to take them where they want to go. Same thing here, same artist, same publisher, different stereotypical Jews. And the image that I showed you at the beginning originates from the same publication. So something created in 1938. It's all over the place in 2024. This is a book. It's called the Poison Mushroom. Same images. This is a children's book. So it shows Jews handing candy to children. Of course, they're going to be molested. Jews corrupting, German womanhood. Jews crucifying, at least semi, perhaps entirely naked women. And there's he's got a flagellum, a whip to beat her. Same artist, same publication. Guy number two that I looked at is a film director named Fritz Hippler, Dr. Fritz Hippler. He was a Nazi Hitler Youth member even before the Nazis came to power, and then he kind of rises up the ranks. He goes into directing. He's not a great director. He's a member of the SS. more of an honorary way, he's not really on active service, but he becomes the go-to guy for Joseph Goebbels when Goebbels wants to have film images sent to the population. And the kind of images he uses, it's a film and it's also a traveling exhibit called the Ewige Jude, the Eternal Jew. So you get a postage stamp cancellation mark that says, the great political show, and it says the Eternal Jew, and you should go when you're in Munich in 1937 to go see it. Poster here from the same show. And in the film, which doesn't run for very long, if you value your sense of happiness, I don't recommend that you see it. I have done this on your behalf, and you don't want to. But I'll give you the thumbnail. Um, it's showing the origin of what is essentially a Jewish bacillus that is spreading and corrupting everything that it touches. They show it's a weird. It's the film is just cut weird. Again, Kipler's not a very good director. So this isn't like an artistic achievement because I think there's some basic things about cinematography that he doesn't really understand very well. But he has Peter Lorre, for example, who was in a film called M, and he somehow ends up in Der Ewige Jude as an example of the Jewish child murderer because that's the role that he played in the movie. It shows again this spreading out of Jews of like again think of a bacteria spreading across Asia and then into Africa and then to the Americas, and it's inevitably going to come unless you do something about it. It shows how Jews are in their natural environment. So it shows children and women and old people that are sickly looking and diseased looking and in rags. But then at the same time, they counterbalance that with Jews that are shown as being wealthy and in charge. And it's kind of a mixed message, but it makes sense if you don't think about it very much. The most outrageous and I think incendiary point of Der Ewige Jude, as again either an information or intelligence operation, is a scene where you have bags of grain. And you've already introduced a little bit earlier in the movie, the idea that Jews are rats. And it shows rats just teeming among the sacks of grain. And the question that you don't have to ask because Hitler is counting on the audience to already understand this intuitively is what are you supposed to do with rats that get in the grain? You know what you're supposed to do. So you don't have to say it. All you have to do is show it. And he ends the film after that vignette with a speech that Hitler makes to the Reichstag in 1939, January 1939, that if the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more again into world war, the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth unless the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. Again, what point exactly is the filmmaker and Goebbels, his boss, trying to make here? It doesn't take a lot of guesswork. What you're trying to do with the film is activate, again, people that might be inclined to already believe some of these things. The same people that are going to staff the different, hierarchies and echelons of extermination programs. Third guy is he's a legitimate film director, so he gets stuff that Hitler does not. His name is Veit Harlan. He has a pretty successful pre-war career. He's one of the stars of the German film production company UFA. He makes a film in 1940 called Jud Sus, so the Jew Sus. It is a quasi-historical, at least the script is, of what was called the court Jew in the 1700s in the Duchy of Württemberg. And the idea here is that the Duke is running out of money and he goes to the Jews because they have money and he borrows money from this money lender, Yud Sus, and then the price for that is Sus is brought into the palace, and eventually he gets more and more power and control, and he brings in more of these dirty Jews from Eastern Europe. He sexually assaults this pure German girl, and all these sort of tropes. And eventually, the Duke dies, and Yud is arrested by the outraged, upright German citizenry of Württemberg in the 1740s, and he's put in an he's sentenced to death. He's hanged inside an iron cage. And the last scene of the movie is this judge saying, "Let this be a lesson to us forever. Do not let these people live among us." But it's the visuals that matter as much as anything else. In the same way that with Hitler's visuals of the rats in the grain, or Ruprecht's visuals of the different stereotypical Jews and how they're secretly controlling all the stuff that's wrong. They're the reason that people were unemployed during the German version of the Depression. They're the reasons that you don't have a thing that you're entitled to. They're all these things that exist both in our space and in their space. I won't go into the legal sort of problems here with or thinking of how you could prosecute this as a crime. Meaning, if I produce an image and the image is designed to get you to hate or despise or commit violence against somebody else, can I successfully prosecute you for that? It becomes more problematic. There's a U.S. Supreme Court case, Brandenburg v. Ohio, from the 1960s, that says to be incitement, there has to be a threat of imminent lawless action. So, as a prosecutor, I'm now going down a separate rabbit hole from my original charge and trying to prove that there was a likelihood of imminent lawless action, which spawns more rabbit holes, which means it's going to be damn difficult to prosecute somebody for incitement. There are a couple of cases where it's worked internationally. There was one in Rwanda that was pretty promising, but it's outside that sphere. It's hard. I'm going to skip this wonderful like Cicero like oration that I was going to have about denazification trials because you don't really care about that right now. In Germany, uh, the post-war period, we were the Americans were 1/4 of the effort to reconstruct and denazify Germany. Um, Part of that process is they sent out a questionnaire to every adult German asking you to list your background and where you're from and the different party organizations that you belong to and some other information as a first step in denazification. And that's about the moment when the Americans decided they didn't really want any part of denazification because it turns out that you're now looking at 18 million forms. And the process was you filled out the form, your form went to a central repository where a poor underpaid clerk checked that name against the different party records that survive. 18 million. At which point the Americans said, it might be better if we just let the Germans do this. And that's where these denazification courts came in, and some of them worked. If you had a prosecutor that, no kidding, hated the Nazis, it was kind of inspiring. But in other cases, it's a predictable whitewash because in a case where a German is going to render a judgment against a fellow German, the same way that in a different circumstance, if an American is rendering a judgment against an American, yeah, the scales of justice may not be as balanced as we like. So, of the three guys that I mentioned, Ruprecht, the cartoonist or caricaturist, he does a couple years in a labor camp. Fritz Hippler of the grain and the rats thing does no time whatsoever. He keeps jumping jurisdictions to kind of stay one step ahead of prosecutors. And Veit Harlan goes to trial, and he is acquitted in the first trial. There's an appeal that the British government puts in, and guess who rules on the appeal but the same judge that acquitted him in the first trial? So, of the three cases, in terms of like your good feeling about like the proper administration of justice punishing Nazis, it's a mixed bag. But largely by 49, of course, the world had turned from World War II and post-war justice to communism is now the flavor of the month, and those things are going to have to be put in the past because we need a brand new state of West Germany, which comes in 1949 as the front line against the Warsaw Pact, well, eventually the Warsaw Pact, but the Soviet Union. I wish I could say that the stuff that was in these films mostly remained there, but it doesn't. So I'm pretty close to the end of my research, and a friend of mine, a lawyer from Chicago, was at the Chicago airport who sends me this picture of this guy in front of him in line, and it's a T-shirt from the same movie, Yud Sus. Uh, Behead the Lernian Hydra of Zionism, which is probably the whole Lernian Hydra thing is probably over this guy's head, but it's a reference to the labors of Hercules and the idea that if you cut off one head, then two heads will spout, unless you burn them by fire. That's how you keep the heads from sprouting. Okay, this is 2020. When did you take this? 2022, I think. Uh, in your internet browser history is not going to thank you because then I went to go look to see where other stuff is available, and there's plenty out there if people want some. So I want to go to influence operation number two, and the same idea that people who bought A also bought B. And when I came in the army, it was 1984, and the bad guys were the Soviet Union. And I'm now have lived long enough to where the bad guys are the Soviet Union again, except with a slight, rebranding. Same guys, same techniques, and same basic objective. The difference between 1984 and now, or 1938 and now, is your ability to do something that Joseph Goebbels could only dream about, which is I can, with a reasonable degree of accuracy and some good probability math, if I know enough about you, and it doesn't have to be a lot, I can make a good guess about what you're going to go for and what you're not going to go for. So if I know I'm probably going to offend somebody here, but that's just the way it goes sometimes. If I know you're a white male and you're 65 and you live in Arkansas, and if I know what your job is, I can pretty much tailor a message that's going to get you fired up. Because again, I'm going to take you to a place that you sort of already were primed to go anyway. Except the difference is between now and then Goebbels he can't micro-target, really. So it's a movie available to everybody. It's a newspaper available to everybody. It's a speech available in public to everybody. And you can't really measure very effectively what percentage of the population you're getting on your team. It was sufficient. This is where this 32, 33% thing comes in. Again, it's not really a plurality. But today, this morning, now, people there's a thing I saw the other day, and it was essentially that for people under 45, the majority of them are getting their news from social media. Social media in all its different forms. So I don't care which. It can be Facebook, can be Twitter, it can be Instagram, it can be any of the social media platforms that almost everybody uses to some degree. Know everything they need to know about you. There is an algorithm working very hard to deliver content that they believe that you're going to like based on a curated engagement model that wants to keep you on the platform. And what they found is that outrage is the most effective way to keep you on the platform. If I can make you mad about what you're seeing, if I can get you somehow emotionally invested in what you're seeing and hearing, getting this thing is seeing, hearing. Because we largely live especially with the demographic is, let's say, 30 years and younger, in kind of a post-literate world, the number of people who actually read, no kidding, books, not that many. There are always some, and well, I hope pleased that there will always be some. They're not doing that. They're consuming information and they're forming opinions and they're feeding their own thing based on what they see, mostly visually, but what they're seeing and hearing. So if I am a party state actor, and this is again a different kind of war. This is the secret kind. And I want to go short of armed conflict because maybe I don't do so well if that happens. But I want you I want to defeat you nonetheless. Yeah, this is just more objectionable crap. Don't it's the same thing too. Um, if you're the Russian Federation, and there's a distinction, by the way, between the Russians who are interested in disruption and the Chinese who are interested in information gathering. I'm going to stick with the Russians here because I know that a little bit better than I know some of the Chinese material. But basically, there's two organizations inside Russia that have been charged with waging the secret war. The one is the FSB. It used to be the second chief directorate of the KGB. It's the counterintelligence arm of Russian intelligence. The other is Russian military intelligence, the GRU, who are the forefront with FSB in working on digital platforms and digital messaging. That's their day job. What they do is look for existing ruptures or fractures within a target group, and they're going to fill those spaces. So it's an incredibly I can't even begin to tell you just like in terms of my admiration for it as a beautifully sophisticated intelligence operation that is absolutely the worst thing on earth. It is incredibly sophisticated. So this is all open source stuff, so I don't have to worry about getting my clearance yanked. But Brexit, of course, the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union. Uh, Alternative for Deutschland. This is the age group in Germany that you may have heard about and you may not have heard about. It is the largest growing party in Germany. It is the modern incarnation of the Nazi Party. Its strength is especially in Eastern Germany, former German Democratic Republic. It is because Germany is a coalition system for the most part. So to form a government, you have to get support from your own party, which is the majority usually, and then other parties to get to a correct number to form a government. Leveraging that, and as well as sort of some peculiarities inside the German Constitution, the ADF is increasingly they're now I think the third or maybe second largest party in Germany. And this is not a Germany thing because guess what? We have our own counterparts of these guys. But ADF, Brexit, Marine Le Pen, who is the Alliance Française, the close to becoming the French president, remarkably close. And of course, our own 2016 election thing, the commonality link here is that every one of these things, as well as hundreds of others that we honestly, I don't have, because, Spencer's going to hit my mic, um, is funded by and digitally supported by the FSB and Russian military intelligence. They get money, they get a lot of money, and they get digital support or campaigns that are in alignment with him to push their message forward, again, to people that already are primed to want to believe them. So the one curious thing about Russian intelligence is they're very much a flood the zone system. In other words, you're pushing 1,000 things at one time, counting on some of those being uncovered. You sort of want them to be discovered because then it gets attention focused on that, and you go, okay, well, we found a Russian cell, or we tripped over this thing, and meantime, the other 900 things that you didn't catch are still sort of actively working their way into your system. So RT is the Russian state television and radio uh, company, is the one you're supposed to see. One of the ones you're supposed to see because its propaganda is obvious and sometimes it's kind of clumsy. And if you read enough of this stuff, you can figure out like, okay, what things are just they're nonsense. There are other more sophisticated things that are not visible to the naked eye. This is problematic. Um, it's working every day toward the same goal, which is destabilization. It doesn't have to go to war. It doesn't have to resort even to some of the stuff in it. The Nazis could never have dreamed of the sophistication capable of using social media as an agent of political objectives, short of war. And AI, that's a whole nother thing, and it just magnifies this stuff by more. I don't think we have no idea honestly what's coming. So before Spencer deep plugs me, um, there are two takeaways here, and I'd like you to consider them very seriously. The first is, and it really is, if you want to avoid the tiger trap, it's first best not to be the tiger, the target. So if you can make yourself not the target, that's a good thing. The second thing is knowing that the tiger trap exists and you shouldn't fall into it. And it's easily said, but it's human beings are weird critters, and they're complicated, and their psychological motives are all over the map. But if you can corrupt a system and cause it to fall, which is the objective of the Russian Federation, it seems logical to me that you can recover a system and strengthen it and cause it not to fall if you wanna. Or maybe you're just okay with watching the parade go by and not participating. But that's historically, as Nazi Germany proved, that's not a very good strategy. That number, by the way, the 33% thing, the last free election that Germany had before Hitler was appointed chancellor. Germany, the Nazi Party was already on a kind of a slump. Their support had gone down a little bit since the previous election, but that number was sufficient to make have Hitler appointed chancellor of Germany. 33% thing, by the way, is about the number of people who think that the 2016 election was stolen. There are other resonances for that, and that 30% thing, which is, in other words, that's about what you need to do a lot of great harm. And that's my spiel for today. How'd I do, Spencer? Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, Carol. Is hello? Does it work?
Mhm.
Let's here. Why don't you? Thank you very much, Professor Hall. And you need to bring the collection over here so we can, George, so we can uh, collect money for the cover our costs. Instructions on how to donate online should appear in the chat. Checks can be mailed to All Souls UU Church, 4501 Walnut Street, Kansas City, Missouri, 64111. Please mention the form in the memo line of your check. You can also go to allsoulskc.org and search for contribute. Now, if you have a question, please come up to the microphone. And well, I don't know if we're going to get that other microphone to work or not. Speak clearly into the microphone. People watching on YouTube should be able to put questions in the chat, and George will monitor those. One question per person, please, until everyone has had an opportunity to ask a question. And please, no speeches so that we can make better use of the time of Professor LeBeau, of Professor Hall. Excuse me, George.
Answer to anything you want.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. And you confirmed my decision from years ago never to participate in social media. My reason was I didn't care what somebody else had for dinner. But now I have much more reason. But my question is we have at any point in time in this world probably 2 billion eyeballs looking at screens at any point in time. So would you comment on how the role of technology in having all these screens out there that are perfect for images? Um, how can we get an alternate message out there about that danger, or is there anybody working on that?
This may be better do kind of a lounge singer sort of thing. Um, the administration recently has put out some guidelines, and the federal government, I think, is starting to move toward the idea of controlling or trying to control internet and tech companies. The problem is, again, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act makes them immune essentially from legal action. That you can't make content providers responsible for the content that appears on their site. So if I want to run neo-Nazi stuff like all day, every day, then if I'm the content provider, if I'm Twitter or I'm Facebook, there's nothing that you can do about that. Under current law, the one answer would be to change the law or to reclassify, for example, internet providers as utilities, which is an interesting idea that's maybe goes someplace and maybe doesn't. But that's your problem. Is it's sort of malicious content, and malicious is not even a strong enough word for it. Content delivery. In other words, if the images that feed on hatred and feed on division and feed on intolerance and feed on violence are not able to get to you. It's sort of like the activation. I think the theory is that the activation switch is going to remain off. Not everybody, but it's going to be enough. I mean, even in the perfect time of the 19 whatevers, those things still existed, but they weren't activated for the most part. And I think that's sort of the answer that we're eventually going to have to move to. The problem is how quickly are you able to get to it before the damage? It's irreparable. There's no way to stop it. Do you want to go to full-on government internet censorship? China does that, for example. I mean, they very tightly control what's allowed to be seen by Chinese kids or Chinese adults. Um, you could adopt a model like that, but there's so many constitutional problems to that. I don't see that as a way forward. And obviously, self-moderation hasn't really gotten off the ground. So I'm hoping there's some sort of that the government can, and that these decisions are supported through the courts. And I wish I had more faith in that was going to happen. That's about the only thing that I can see. But again, the bad guys are working really hard every day, do as much damage as they can. I think it's probably an unsatisfactory answer to what was a good question. Oh, cool.
Hi. You talked about propaganda. You talked about propaganda still being around today. Could you speak a little bit to how the trans community is kind of currently being exploited by that? You know, they're going to ruin women's sports. They're going to be in the wrong bathroom, all that kind of stuff.
We're going to go back to the Nazi Germany thing for a second, and I think the idea here is that the harm that you can do, it's gonna fail if you hit it like straight on. In other words, so if I say if your message in 1937, 1938, and this was never ever ever the public message of Nazi Germany, which is we need to go out and kill all the Jews we can. Never did that. So the idea too, in terms of affecting the trans community, I think the forces working against that they have realized that there are more subtle ways to do the same sort of damage. So you can say things that are just off enough to where if you're if you understand the lingo, you can understand where they want this thing to go, but it's never going to be overt. And again, that's the way the good intelligence systems operate. I don't ever hit you in the face with something. I can do 1,000 other things that are going to try to cause people to marginalize, hate, harm people that are trans. And again, I don't have to go very far. I can open my phone now and find it's everywhere.
Would you comment about how fascists tend to blame others for behavior that they are actually doing themselves? Like your slide about the virus attacking the Asia and America, and then how the Nazis after 52 or after the war were actually creating viruses to inoculate the world. Um, in fact,
Mm.
the same. In fact, we see this today with if there's somebody on the right wing blaming others for what they're actually doing.
It's that's kind of that's an interesting thing. So in Nazi Germany, it's a single font of information. Okay, Joseph Goebbels is making decisions about messaging and editorials and things like that from a central hub. Everything that you would have heard in Nazi Germany, everything you would have seen, everything you would have read, are all part of, they're coming from a central place. So, for example, on September 1st, 1939, German radio early in the morning announces that Polish soldiers have crossed into German territory and have killed German border guards and have attacked a Polish radio and attacked a station in a town called Gleiwitz. If you're a German listening to the radio and you don't know any better, because there's no way you could know any better, the only source of information you have is what you've just heard. So I think that you're going to start you would have accepted that as a fact. And it works effectively, but again, it doesn't. The inoculation maybe is again an informed electorate, because certain things they just in context they don't really don't seem to make much sense. But I think that, and I'm tempted to think of like people as just being like certain of them as like just gullible or kind of stupid. But that's not. I don't think that's accurate. Again, it depends where you're getting your information from. So it's going to sound more plausible if I say, okay, if I'm doing X and I accuse you instead of doing X, that you're going to buy that. Again, if you're already sort of primed to want to think it. Otherwise, it just sounds just hopelessly stupid. Again, I don't think probably an inadequate answer to a good question.
Uh, what can you comment on the big lie? If you repeat a lie often enough, people start to believe it, and we seem to have that going on now. And the media is actually in their even-handed philosophy of we come into seem to, well, if we say bad things about one side, we have to say bad things about another.
You're It's like there are a couple things in collision. Once there's a basic sense of fairness, that all viewpoints have equal weight or equal merit, and I think that's demonstrably not the case. The other thing too is that there are some federal laws that could come into play here. But I always come back to the idea that there's no constitutional right to tell lies, and you don't have to sponsor lies, and you don't have to listen to them. and you don't have to hang around with people that say them. The journalistic practices, I think, the traditional ones that work just fine for most of our history, are now completely they're not adequate at all. And so the question is, okay, if the election of 1932 or 1932 was held today, how okay would you be with giving Hitler equal airtime, or giving one of his spokesmen equal airtime, so they could tell you about how awful the Jews are, or how unfairly the Versailles Treaty has treated us, and let that seep into people's ears and consciousness? I don't think I would be okay with it, but then again, who gets to be the arbiter? Who decides, okay, that this message is vile and it's poison? I don't know. I just know I can see the wreckage around me for us doing that for a while now.
Yeah, my my partner Peggy, who's a wayward member here, was at the Jewish Community Center during the Obama administration when a man named called himself Glenn Cross came to kill Jews and killed a couple of Christians in between where Peggy had parked and their car that they arrived in. And only reason that he didn't shoot at them through at Peggy through the glass was the reflection. He couldn't tell, and the guard was got them on the floor. Anyway, um, so this sort of stuff is, I mean, to me, it's tangible. It's, you know, it bothers me more than it bothers Peggy. But I think that what's going on now, this was a Obama minister. I think that the change, and I want you to speak to this. uh, There's a greater area of application. It's not just getting people like that activated. It's something much greater or outside or is it's what you're talking about isn't just going to get a few people killed. It's a different level, and that's what I want you to try to talk about. I don't know what.
I think with the Jewish Community Center shooting, what I've seen of the defendant in that case is he kind of reminds me of Julius Streicher. Okay, he's the guy that published the Stürmer newspaper. So when he's on trial in Nuremberg, he can't seem to help himself. So he's got like this monomania about Jews that he's had his whole life. And he just couldn't shut up about it, even when he's on trial for his life. And his lawyer tried to quit, and the court said they couldn't. And then he was just, I think, mentally unsound. Uh, Cross comes across as somebody who's got like a monomania, who's mentally unsound. But I think the problem more generally is not the handful of people that are mentally unsound. The problem is that, do it a different way. In another type of war, counterinsurgency. So when I was in Iraq in 2006 and 7, this was our thing. If you think of a line, and you've got a section on each end, and you've got a section on the left that's green, and those are the people that really like you. And then you've got a section on the end, and these are the people that really, really hate you and are going to do something bad. And then you've got this 80% chunk in the middle. And the idea here is that the war, sort of for hearts and minds, to use a Vietnam expression, is about getting that 80%. Either they don't have to be necessarily for you, they just can't be against you. And I think that plays back into sort of the political and social discourse that we have now. It's not a question of the people who are doing actual, no kidding, harm to institutions, to friendship, to community, to the rest of it. There are not all that many of them, like, that are hardcore, like this is what they're really fired up about this. It's the complicity by silence of the people that let that go on. And, I've been just as guilty of that as anybody else, which is there are times when I regret deeply now that somebody has said something that I should have had the moral courage to say, to stop it where in its tracks. No, I'm not doing that. Here's why this is wrong. And I think that's sort of the game that we're playing now, which is how do you get that big chunk of most people in the middle to get to where they're no longer going to accept something that is demonstrably destructive to not just the nation state, but to everything that is kind of important. I can only, deal with what I encounter during the day, but I think that I'm at the point now where, first of all, I kind of don't give a damn about what somebody thinks about me. But I'm okay with saying no, no, no. And I'd like to see more people kind of in that ballpark.
Oh, thank you for coming. This is really electric. Um, one of the thoughts I had was your commentary, and it's so on target of people getting most of their information through the media, those platforms, and the misinformation, disinformation, and just outright um, ridiculousness. It's flooded everywhere. And I often hear people saying, I don't know what to think because I don't know that there's any one accurate story about this. And so the flood of information seems to be complicit with people being able to make critical decisions or informed decisions. And so, what I'd like to hear a little bit about is what in the world has happened with Rwanda, because the drumbeats with Rwanda were very, I think, future foretelling. And the role of the media in terms of dehumanizing and setting up the playbook for such a destruction has happened. I think 500,000 people.
8 to 900,000 worldwide.
8 to 900,000. Would you speak to how it is working in the court systems to bring justice? Because you mentioned that's one of the cases that they are having some success as far as incitement and finding justice around that process.
I wish I could be. Yeah, I really started out this morning. I wanted to be optimistic about this, but I can't do. So, I really did. I used to be kind of a true believer in terms of the international system, criminal court system, and it's still the best thing going. And we can have that discussion another longer format another day. But the idea that law is going to come riding in to save us, I think, is probably not that's not going to happen. So with mass atrocities or genocide, uh, you can punish after the fact, but the problem is, your willingness to break norms and the law are proportional to your chances of getting caught. So in other words, if I caught 100% of everybody who exceeds the speed limit, people are pretty much going to drive the speed limit. If I catch one in every 30,000, the math says there's no incentive there for you to obey it if you don't want to. In the case of Rwanda and Cambodia and the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia, we're talking about processes. I think or let's just take Cambodia for example. It took that court was in session for 17 years, and they convicted 3 defendants at a cost of I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's a lot. Uh, and for Yugoslavia, it's the same thing too. You've got more convictions there, but the court lasted 22 years. Nuremberg by was less than a year. Okay, it's gavelled on the 1st of November. Sentences are announced on the 1st of October. In 1946. So swift justice is not something the international system really does terribly well. In the case of Rwanda, the curious thing about it is you have ethnic tensions between Tutsis and Hutus that have been simmering for quite a while. What shocked everybody was the speed at which it goes from level, let's say, 2 to level 10. And there's a 3-month period in there where, again, this is not like killing by at a remote. It's killing with a machete and getting people, and you're coordinating people. This is where like this incitement thing comes into Rwanda, using the radio to coordinate people to be at a certain place and bring your machetes, and then we're going to tell you what to do when you get there. to go from 2 to 10 was astounding. And I think the problem is that things don't work necessarily in sort of slow measured progression, and that's, to my mind, the warning of Rwanda, which is that it can shift dramatically, and you may never quite see this coming. Going back to my January 6th thing, okay, so I mean, I'm watching the news like everybody else that morning. It's like, oh, didn't see that coming. Should have been smarter. Wasn't. It just wasn't. We're in dangerous shark infested waters, and you never know.
Yeah, hope is a real quick question from Michael Hoy on our YouTube audience. Do you know what happened to the people who were working for the those an Internet Research Agency, and who are they working for now?
Nothing happened to them. They were indicted in federal court. The Justice Department has list. I'm trying to think how many defendants we have now for the IRA. They're still operational. They're not working out of the same building anymore, so that's inconvenient. But they just have stopped using that name. I don't think they actually have like a new moniker. At least I haven't heard about one. But a lot of people, and there, by the way, this isn't just Russian state actors. You have tens of thousands of independent operators who are happy to help you out with this. Computer hackers, the thing they go for is called a 0 day. And a 0 day is when you find a fault in a system, and you can sell 0 days to buyers who want to exploit. Okay, you want to crash the air traffic control system? Okay, I found a way in. How much you want to pay me for that? And you sit on it maybe until you need it, and then it's just waiting. And then if it's go time, then it's go time. Again, they have conventions to talk about this. So that's a real thing. So if like power grids and pipelines go down, and those in some cases are just you're testing the wire. That's a real problem, and the advantage in that case goes to the attacker, not the defender, because they choose the time and place. So, worrisome.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Hell. Just a reminder, each week's program is broadcasted on KKFI roughly 1.5 weeks later. This presentation will likely is scheduled to air a week from Tuesday. Um, I, whatever that date is on 90.1 FM, and go to kkfi.org and click listen at that time. If you'd like to share this with others, invite them to search for the forum. It also um, search also YouTube channel for also ac.org. The second YouTube channel is for the forum. Or after 8 p.m. After it broadcasts on KKFI, you can go to kkfi.org, then News and Public Affairs, then All Souls Forum, and find this episode. The podcast should be there shortly after 8 p.m. Next week, Mayor Quentin Lucas will bless us with his State of the Union address in the Bragg Auditorium. And one more question, Professor Hall, might you have time for a half an hour or so of informal discussion in the library that's just down the hall here? And you're invited to Safer Services, which begin in the Bragg Auditorium at the end of the hall at 10:45, or online at All Souls UU Church YouTube channel, the first YouTube channel at allsoulskc.org. Thank you very much.